join us today. And Scott, those of you that know, uses this opportunity to do a lot of scanning for his artist edition books. I literally saw him downstairs with a pile this big and he begged off. Scanning, as Walter could also attest to, scanning is not an easy in and out kind of process. So.
No, is that your water? Did you stock that? Oh, yeah, it's fresh water.
Yeah, it's fresh water.
I was going to say, I was sitting there before. That might be mild water, but I guess it's not.
No,
so you're off the hook.
We're all trying to get out of here without COVID or concrete.
Honest to God, if I get out of here without COVID this year, I'm going to be astounded. It'll be a miracle. I'm just going to be astounded, but you know, it is what it is.
It is what it is. So I'm not going to do an introduction for Walter. I assume any of you that came up here are intrigued enough for the panel know who Walter is and know a little bit about his, certainly his unbelievable CV. I just saw, I'm not keeping track of your total number of years in career, but Manhunter is 50 years old, was he? Did I get that right?
Yes. August 1st, yes, because August 1st of this year was my 51st anniversary of coming to New York to try and get into comics. And I began Manhunter about 6 months into my career. So it came out about 6 months after I had done it, which means, again, August. So early August was the 50th anniversary of the first issue of Manhunter.
So cool.
And about the 40th anniversary of, I think it was Thor, maybe.
Yes, we just had that. That was on social media too. Speaking of which, Howard, Jake, and I a little while ago just did an homages and swipes and tropes and had a terrific panel. At least the audience seemed to think so. So we like.
Howard's a terrific panel by himself.
Yeah, I just give him my 12 And by the way, so were you. But rather than put 337 up here, I figured I'd put the following issues. So, and we had Beta Rays again before, so I think it's appropriate. That's appropriate. But what's interesting, you know, Walter's had a sort of a good take at a lot of Jack's works, and it's taken a while for the Fantastic Four Artist Edition to come out. I can't take any responsibility for that delay, but.
As long as it makes it.
But it's printed and it's on a boat or about to get on a boat or something.
It's probably on the boat now. If it's not actually coming into the harbor, it's pretty. It should be. I've seen different publication dates, so I don't know. Amazon has it at sometime in early October. I've heard September. I don't know the answer. I wish it had been here. I'd love to have that copy was here.
Yeah,
but maybe in time for the New York Comic Con.
All right.
I don't know for sure. We'll see.
That'd be good.
Let's see.
And Walter and I have been talking a lot about the Fourth World stuff lately. What I told him the other day was, I think of all the people at DC that tackled Jack's worlds after Jack was done, I thought Walter's was the most interesting and most Kirby-esque in many ways, despite the fact that John Byrne had done a very nice job with some of the stuff that he had done. But yours feels bigger to me somehow. I can't.
Well, maybe that might be partly because I think when John did it, it was originally what the New Gods or something they called. They changed the title to Jack Kirby's Fourth World. The trouble with Jack stuff in the Fourth World is that he had 4 comic books, 2 comics each month. They rotated. They were bi-monthly comics, so you got 2 comics each month. I think it was Jack, Jimmy Olsen, the New Gods, Forever People, and Mr. America. And so he had a great big stage to play on. Archie Goodwin, who was the editor, one of the best editors of comics ever had, no longer living. But he told me one time, he thought Jack had outgrown monthly comics once he did the Fourth World stuff. And his work after that was really just too big for a monthly comic to really contain, even though it was kind of maybe true. But what it meant was I think John was trying to put all of the Fourth World stuff into 1 comic a month, which I get because it's all so much fun to play with. But I thought that was such a broad focus. When I took over, and John very kindly left me a couple of loose ends. When he finished it up, I was going to take over the property. And he left a couple of loose ends for me to pick up on and use. And I just called my book Orion. I thought I would just make it mostly about Orion. But I mean, other characters are in there. But I did try to make it, since it was Orion, I tried to make a big focus. My take on the Fourth World. You guys anybody here read the Fourth World stuff? Okay. it should be read in the order in which it was published. They usually put out all the new gods in one volume, all the forever people, and so on. But they did put an omnibus, a series of volumes of all the books in the order in which they came out. That's my favorite order. It's the order I read them when they came out. I was reading art school when they came out. I read the first Jimmy Olsen. It was like I had the top of my head blown off. I just said, the Mountain of Judgment, the Harrys, Superman, all of this, a converted missile carrier. What the hell is going on? Jimmy Olsen, really? I mean, I was crazy. I just, and then there were 3 issues, and then New Gods came out, and so on. And so, my take on all that stuff, this is just me, is that Jack was telling the story of the Cosmic War, a great war between opposing forces, the New Gods and the Dark Side and Apocalypse. And he did it. Jack was a World War II vet, European theater, I believe.
Walter, can I interrupt you for 1 second? So what I want, they'll kick us out again. So I want to let the slideshow run. We have a bunch of Q&A with Walter to kind of go through, but let it go while he's talking. If you can listen to Walter and look at the screen, or if you look away at Walter, you're gonna miss something. That's cool too. There's your fair warning, and let's see if we can get this to work. It's worked in every little trial we've done.
There it goes.
There we go. Okay, so
you're on your way. So so it was Cosmic War, and basically the New Gods were the war at the top. That was the main war between the opposing forces. The Forever People, where war as Darkseid in one of the lines says, war is the cold game of the butcher, and Orion understands that. Forever People is the war from the young person's point of view, where it might still be a great adventure. You haven't gotten to the butcher stage yet, but it's just, man, you're out there, you're doing stuff, and it's, you're risking your life and limb. But the idea that you might actually die kind of was beyond your young age at the time. Mr. Miracle is the conscientious objector. He's the guy that does not want to get into the fight, and he gets being sucked back in. But he wants to stay out of it. Doesn't work that way, but that's what that was about. And Jimmy Olsen was really the war at the Earth level. You guys ever heard of Doc Smith? I see a couple of nods here and there. He was a pulp science fiction writer back in the 30s and 40s. Wrote these great he had 6 novels, the Lensman series, 4 novels in the Skylark series. And he had these giant, and it was a series where things started off small, and then each book got bigger and bigger and bigger. And Jack was reading all that at the same time. He had the small stuff going on in Kirby, in Jimmy Olsen. And so when I took over Orion, I could do all that stuff at once. And so I thought, concentrate on Orion, it's the main war in a matter of speaking, and I can bring in other guys as I go along. And that's where the structure of my stuff came from the, hopefully, kind of Philip Drouillet, French artist, this gigantic stuff, bigger than anybody else I was in town. And I wanted to get a sense of that scale with the gods against it, and playing against it, and with a universe that's fairly inimical to human life. And that's what I was trying to do with Orion. So, but I thought by keeping the focus more or less on Orion, I could maybe keep the reader interested in what was happening. I didn't really, but I tried. We had trouble giving that book away, but I had a great time doing it.
Is that true? It didn't sell for around?
No, that's right. No, when it got canceled, my publisher, my editor-in-chief, and my editor all took me out to lunch when it was canceled. Which I was very kind of them, because a lot of times your book gets canceled by fax, or maybe now by email. But it was they just, Paul gave me another 3 or 4 issues to wrap everything up, which was, I'd like to have about 3 more, but that was okay. It was very kind of them to let me actually have a few issues to kind of tie things together and bring the story to a climax. So I was happy with that. I was sad it was another way. I had about 5 years of stories to do, but that almost never works out. People come back 20 years later and say, "Oh, this is pretty good. How come I wasn't reading this at the time?" I can't tell you. I like to think I'm ahead of the curve.
I would say it's fair. I would say it's very fair. I've got a bunch of questions for Walter, but before I do, I'm going to represent Scott, who wanted to tell the story of how he met Jack Kirby, because it's such a great story out of a different era. And I mean, you probably know the story, but I think we've done it a couple of times. But Scott was buying some Kirby comic books at a comic book store, and the manager or the owner, whoever was dealing with Scott, Scott was 13 at the time, said to him, "Oh, you like Jack Kirby stuff, obviously?" And Scott said, "Yeah, I'm a big fan." He goes, "Well, you know, his phone number is publicly listed. You should give him a call." So Scott went home, and he told his mom what had happened in the story, and his mom said, "Well, yeah, I'm gonna give him a call." So I'm not sure Scott knew what to say to Jack once he answered the phone. But shortly thereafter, they made the phone call and got an invite to Kirby's house in Thousand Oaks, where Roz Kirby made Scott a tuna salad sandwich, and Scott got to talk to Kirby about his art, his works, and came away with I think it's Captain America sketch. I haven't seen it in a while, but it's a Captain America sketch, and I think that'll be the last piece of art that and the Manhunter Batman piece. I think those will be the last two. Probably his kids will end up getting those, but it was a different world, and I just love that idea. So
a lot of people visited Jack and Roz in their home. No, I did not know Jack. I met him a couple of times very briefly. I had one 10-minute conversation, which I remember nothing. You know, oh, Jack Kirby. But they were very kind, and they were very inviting, gracious to fans.
But I was fortunate that when we were at Topps, we were sort of Jack's final publisher. He was doing some stuff with Image at the same time. It's a little bit different arrangement. But when I finally got to meet Roz in person, because I'd actually met Jack as a fan at a couple of conventions, but I finally got to meet Roz, she asked me to repeat my name, and I said what it was, and we talked on the phone a couple of times, and she said, "I like you." And it was just kind of out of the blue. I said, well, great, I'm glad to hear that. She said, "My maiden name is Goldstein." She goes, "Well, probably related." And I said, at that point, you're like, "Yeah, absolutely."
Oh, I'm sure we are.
Yeah, that's
a couple
right.
generations back.
It's Jewish geography, but it's fun, and she was honestly, she was the nicest person, and she lived a few years beyond Jack, who died in '94, and we still had some stuff with Topps in terms of payments and whatnot. That was probably one of the biggest checks that Jack had ever gotten. And honestly, that was Arthur Shore, the chairman of Topps, and Ira Friedman, our publisher, and Jim Salcroft, our editor. They made sure Jack was taken care of. It was great.
And the comics paid so little for most of Jack's career. That was just the way it was.
Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't done this panel in a few years. Remind us again how you discovered Jack Kirby in comics.
My mom's from Iowa. She grew up out there in a little town, a little county courthouse. And we'd go out and visit my grandmother when she was alive up through late high school. We were out there in 60, I don't remember what year it was, 63. No, it was before superheroes, probably in the 50s. And there was a drugstore beneath my grandmother's apartment, and it had a smell like an old drugstore. I can still remember. And once in the blue moon, I walk into somewhere, I smell it, and I'm instantly about 12 years old in Alameda, Iowa. So there was a spinner rack, and there was a comic, one of the comics in the rack. I'd never seen anything like it. And it was, I don't know, Tales to Astonish, I've forgotten which one it was. But it was one of the Marvel Monster books, which I'd never seen. They weren't carried anywhere at home in Maryland. I grew up in Maryland, in College Park, which isn't so far from here. But there were comic spinner racks and drugstores and stuff here and there, but you didn't see a lot. I never saw Atlas comics, so this was still Atlas Boys Marvel. And there was a lead story called The Glob, and The Glob was this statue, and some guy, a bearded, one of Jack's old bearded guys came, and he, wearing a hamburger or whatever he was wearing, and hired this young painter to go paint this great statue in this abandoned, looked like Castle of Frankenstein Castle. And so he had to paint it just before midnight, and whatever was going on. And so he had this great, thick, gloppy paint, and so only Jack could draw, probably inked by Dick Ayers, I would think, at the time. And so he paints this whole, so the statue is dripping with paint, and it's all those weird marble colors from back in those days. Weird oranges and dark red and brown reds and stuff like that. And And at the stroke of midnight, the creature comes alive. And it turns out it's the advanced scout for some sort of alien race that's going to invade Earth. And it has to kill this guy. So they have a chase through the castle while the thing is, the glob is dripping paint and chasing him. And finally, the guy gets back to his painting studio in the castle, and he's able to grab a couple of giant carboys of turpentine and throw them at the glob, and they hit him, and the paint drips off him, and he stiffens back up again and says, I don't ever paint this guy again. And that's where the story went. And I loved it. I'd never seen anything like it. As an adult, I'm thinking, so when the glob's army arrives, our army gets out a bunch of carboys and turpentine, some high pressure hoses, and the invasion will be over in about 20 seconds. But as a kid, it never crossed my mind. But it was just drawn in this, gritty, rough style in a way that I'd never seen, colored in a way I'd never seen. And so I was taken, it might have said Kirby Ayers at the bottom of the first page, I don't remember. But I loved it. So that was my first introduction to Kirby. I found one other monster book later that had a Kirby lead story. And there was some Don Heck. Yes, that's the one.
Okay. I'll try
Journey to Mystery. I remember that. Journey to Mystery. I should remember that.
Okay.
So I ended up, the first time I saw Jack, where it resonated, I just said, oh my God. I was in college. I was a freshman in college at Amherst College in Massachusetts. And there was 4 dormitories that were all freshman dorms. I was over one of the other dorms, a friend of mine. There's a book called Emotional Intelligence by Dan Goleman. That was this guy. That was the guy's room I was in. So I was in Dan's room. He had a roommate. I remember his roommate, who his roommate was. And they had a copy of Journey to Mystery. I think it's 112, which is the second grade Gargoyle story. And it was inked by Chick Stone. And it starts off with a splash page of this Viking ship